Somewhere in your family tree, there is either a man built out of dust in 6 days, or a small-brained, dirt-covered weirdo who needed 2 million years just to figure out how to sharpen a rock. And today we are finding out exactly which embarrassing relative you legally have to claim. Yes, your origin story might be way more chaotic than you think, because right now, there are two completely different candidates fighting for the title of your actual first ancestor, and they could not be more different if they tried. Candidate number 1. Adam and Eve, the original couple, summoned into existence fully formed, no childhood, no awkward teenage acne phase, just instantly adult and living rent-free in the most luxurious garden ever described in human history. Candidate number 2, Homo Habilis, a short, hairy creature wandering around East Africa 2.4 million years ago, holding a chipped rock like it is the latest iPhone, because for him, it basically was. One side hands you divine creation in paradise, the other side hands you millions of years of evolutionary grinding through dirt, danger, and trial and error. So which one is actually sitting at the top of your family tree? Buckle up, because both of these origin stories are about to get extremely chaotic, extremely funny, and somehow both completely believable depending on who you ask. Let's kick things off with Adam and Eve, the story that practically everyone has heard at least once, whether in church, in a movie, or from that one relative who brings it up randomly at Thanksgiving dinner like it is breaking news. According to the Bible, God forms Adam directly from dust, which means the very first human being's origin story is basically started as dirt, became a person, no LinkedIn required. Then God notices Adam seems a little lonely, wandering around paradise, all by himself, talking to animals that cannot talk back. So he decides to fix that. While Adam is asleep, God removes one of his ribs and uses it to create Eve. So technically, Eve is the very first spin-off character in human history, and Adam wakes up one rib short and apparently does not even ask questions about it. They are placed together in the Garden of Eden, a paradise with 0 bills, 0 traffic, 0 arguments about whose turn it is to do chores, and there is exactly one rule they have to follow. Do not eat the fruit from one specific tree. That is it. One tree, in a garden the size of an entire country, full of every other fruit imaginable, and yet a talking snake slithers in, smooth talks Eve into eating that exact forbidden fruit. She shares it with Adam, and just like that, paradise gets revoked instantly. Suddenly there is pain, there is labor, there is clothing, because apparently nobody noticed they were naked until that very moment, and humanity gets booted out of paradise faster than someone getting kicked out of a club for breaking the one rule posted right at the entrance. According to a literal reading of the Bible's genealogies, this entire event happened around 6,000 years ago. 6,000 years, start to finish. That is the entire timeline according to that version of the story. Now let's flip over to the other side of the family tree and meet Homo Habilis, because trust me, this guy's backstory could not be more different. We are talking about East Africa, somewhere around 2.4 million years ago, specifically around a location called Olduvai Gorge, which scientists treat like one giant ancient crime scene packed with clues. Homo habilis was not winning any beauty contests. Small brain, roughly a third the size of yours, a heavily sloped forehead, and a body built like he had skipped leg day for about 2 million years straight. But here is the twist that earns him a permanent spot in the history books. This guy figured out how to deliberately chip rocks into sharp-edged tools. No magic powers, no garden, no rib-based creation process, just raw survival instinct paired with a sharpened stone that worked basically like the Stone Age version of a multi-tool. Because of that single breakthrough, scientists classify him as one of the earliest known members of our genus, Homo, essentially the opening scene of the actual Humans trilogy. Before him, you had earlier relatives like Lucy, the famous Australopithecus skeleton, who was basically humanity's rough first draft, walking upright but still very clearly giving off confused ape energy. Homo habilis represents the upgrade, like your phone leveling up from a brick that could only make calls to suddenly being able to send text messages. Revolutionary for its time, absolutely hilarious by modern standards, but undeniably a massive leap forward. Here is where the real chaos begins, because once you put these two stories side by side, the timeline gap becomes almost too ridiculous to process. Adam and Eve, according to a literal biblical reading, appear roughly 6,000 years ago, Homo habilis shows up roughly 2.4 million years ago. That gap is so enormous that if human history were a movie, Adam and Eve would not even appear until the very last few seconds of the post-credits scene, while Homo habilis was already several sequels deep into the franchise, complete with spin-offs and prequels. And the story does not stop with Homo habilis either, because right after him comes an entire lineup of increasingly impressive relatives. Homo erectus shows up next, taller, smarter, and credited with figuring out how to control fire, basically becoming the first relative who finally learned to cook instead of eating everything raw like some kind of caveman sushi enthusiast. After that comes Homo heidelbergensis, followed by the Neanderthals, who get an unfair reputation for being dumb brutes despite having brains larger than modern humans, burying their dead with what looks like genuine ritual, and almost certainly having far better cold tolerance than anyone reading this sentence right now. Eventually, somewhere around 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens finally enters the picture, a name that literally translates to wise man, which, depending on what nonsense is trending online this week, is a title that feels increasingly questionable. Now here is where the evidence really piles up in favor of the Homo habilis side of the story. Science backs this entire lineage with fossils, ancient stone tools, skeletal remains, and DNA evidence that all line up consistently like puzzle pieces clicking into place. We share roughly 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, which means somewhere far back in time, you and a chimpanzee technically share a mutual ancestor, like some ancient extended family member nobody talks about at gatherings. One branch of that family eventually went on to invent smartphones, fast food delivery apps, and reality television, while the other branch is still out there in the wild casually throwing fruit at tourists, completely unaware and honestly, seemingly much happier about it. Meanwhile, the Adam and Eve story was never really competing on the same playing field as fossil evidence, because that was never the actual point of the story in the first place. For billions of people across multiple major religions, this story is not meant to function as a literal scientific timeline. It functions as a moral and spiritual explanation. It is less, here is the precise sequence of biological events, and more, here is why human beings consistently struggle with temptation, consequences, and bad decisions, which honestly feels relatable considering most people have personally experienced the modern equivalent of biting into a forbidden fruit they absolutely should not have touched. And here is a twist that makes this whole debate even funnier. Science actually has its own version of Adam and Eve. And no, that is not a joke. Geneticists use the terms mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam to describe the most recent common female and male ancestors from whom all living humans inherited specific pieces of DNA, except these two never met, never lived in the same garden, and were probably separated by tens of thousands of years and an ocean's worth of generations. So somewhere along the way, biology basically looked at the Bible and said, interesting names, we are stealing them, then completely rewrote the entire backstory. So after all of that, who actually wins this ancestral showdown? Here comes the plot twist nobody saw coming. Maybe this was never actually a competition you needed to choose a winner for in the first place. Science hands you the where, the when, and the how, tracing a physical, biological lineage backward through layers of fossils and strands of DNA all the way to early toolmakers like Homo habilis, grinding out survival in East Africa using nothing more than sharpened rocks and pure stubborn determination. Religion, through stories like Adam and Eve, hands you the why, the deeper meaning, the moral framework passed down across countless generations to help explain human nature, guilt, temptation, and that universal feeling of having one simple rule and somehow still managing to break it. One explains the biological mechanics of your body. The other explains the dramatic, messy, complicated nature of your behavior. And honestly, that contrast might be the funniest part of this entire debate. Because depending on which version you choose to believe, you either began as dust shaped directly by divine hands inside a literal paradise, or you began as a small-brained, dust-covered creature smashing rocks together for survival millions of years ago. Either way, somehow, against every possible odd, that long, strange, occasionally hilarious journey eventually led directly to you, sitting right here, watching a video about your own ancient origin story, while almost certainly still making the exact same kinds of questionable decisions your ancestors were making thousands or millions of years before you, regardless of which version of the story actually turns out to be true.